Hey, on the phone with us this morning, we have 15th District State Representative Mr. Jeremie Dufault of SELA. Good morning, Jeremie.
Good morning, Dave. Good morning, Lance. Thank you for the invitation to be here.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to say that you're also an Army Reserve JAG officer. You served in Kuwait and Afghanistan. And 15th District covers pretty much, part of Yakima County, including Sela, Yakima, Terrace Heights, Wapato, Moxie, Union Gap, Sunnyside, Zilla, Toppenish, Granger, Grandview, and Mabton. Whew, you got a big territory there.
What I wanted to know, Mr. Representative, is why you felt the right decision to put your high school yearbook picture up. Because you look like you're about 18 years old in that photo, Jeremie. You have a youthful countenance. Yeah. Yes, you do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I am very proud of the high school that I went to. Davis High School Pirates represent. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for the teachers and the coaches that helped me get to good academics and leadership positions. Back then, I was not a good student coming out of middle school, and I had a coach. I'm sure a lot of people in the community remember him, Tom O'Brien. We used to call him Mister. He taught at Carroll and coached at Carroll and Marquette, and then at Davis High School. And I remember one of my first days at Davis, I was walking through the hallway, and he grabbed me by the ear. He used to be able to do that back in the day. And he pulled me in, and he said, "Doofy, how come you're not in my class?" And I just froze. And he said, "You have 200 yards of bear crawls tonight after football practice." And holding on to my ear took me down to the counselor's office and changed my entire schedule, including his class. And like I said, I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for people investing in me like that at Davis High School.
That is quite a story. That's fantastic. That's one of your hallmarks, in my opinion, in the short time that I've known you, and that is your humility and your appreciation. That's character, and not being political here, I just see you as a real quality human, and the fact that you have those kind of appreciations for how you got to where you are and as successful as you are, I think that's fantastic. So that's a little Davism aside there.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. Let us talk about the 15th District, and you've got, one term under your belt now, right?
Yes, that's right.
And you're still thinking about going back. Okay, so psychological profile to come later. What about, let's start with the thing that starts everything, and that's a conversation about COVID.
Yeah.
How you feel the state's response was, what more could we have done, and where are we going to be budgetary-wise when we come back in January? So kind of give us your take on the COVID story.
That's right. Well, I think those are the two key questions. First of all, what more could we have done? We could have trusted the people a little bit more. I just believe in smaller, smarter government. And I think what we saw in the early stages of this crisis was everybody coming together. Legislators, we were still in session, the governor, and we said, okay, how can we get resources out to the people so they can make the best decisions for their families, their businesses, their churches, and their communities? And then shortly after we left, the governor decided that he was going to, in my opinion, overstep his authority, his emergency authority, and start to act like a person who is running an empire instead of a democratically elected governor who is one of three co-equal branches. And what we saw was a lack of communication from the governor's office. We saw mixed messaging. We saw reliance upon bureaucrats instead of elected officials. What should have happened within 30 days after declaring a state of emergency is that we should have the governor should have called the legislature back into session, and we should have hammered out all the things that we could do to help. We were meeting 3 times a week on the phone with the House Republican caucus. There were Democratic legislators who wanted to go back into session, but the Senate Democrats blocked it. You have to have 60%. We had 60% in the House. We did not have it in the Senate. And, of course, the governor had no interest in calling a special session because I think he was rather enjoying his expanded powers. So what we had to deal with at that point then was we had to just try to make what changes we could at the margin. And I think one thing that you'll see in the next legislative session is you're going to see a lot of activity, bipartisan activity. I believe in bipartisan activity to rein in the governor's emergency powers. The emergency powers that were authorized were intended to be for a short-term, short-period emergency, like a nuclear meltdown, a tsunami, an earthquake. This was not intended to be a year-long handover of full authority to the governor's office to do whatever he wants. Because guess what's coming next, Lance and Dave? Guess what's coming next? If Inslee gets reelected, the next emergency that he's going to declare is going to be a climate emergency. And who knows what kind of moves he will take in that circumstance. You may not be able to drive your car unless you have an electric car. You may not be able to fly in an airplane. And I enjoyed the conversation that you had during about the debate, because I think that was a big statement that Joe Biden made last night to say that he wants to shut down oil and gas. Airplanes, cars. Not everybody can afford an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
We don't have the technology to be there yet, and I thought that was very irresponsible, and Joe Biden has been avoiding questions the whole time of this election. Port packing, what's he going to do with taxes, and Trump cornered him and got him to answer that question, which everybody who follows politics knows is really coming down, and that is a $100 trillion Green New Deal at the federal level, and Jay Inslee has one at the state level. So when we go back and we start talking about budgets, when we start talking about priorities, we need to make sure that we have enough Republicans and enough common sense Democrats over in Olympia to block the governor's agenda should he be reelected along some of these very expensive, some of these economy-killing, some of these not wanted by the people proposals and priorities that we saw in my first term in the legislature.
Well said, sir.
Wow, yeah.
Well said. You gotta expect that that's what's out there. Here's a guy that took time out to run a minor presidential campaign, all based on climate change. Why won't that be what he continues to push here? So good to be on guard and try to form coalitions and stuff to be able to head that off at the pass. Well, okay, so we are in sort of a modified Phase 2 in Yakima County. What more can we do for area businesses in terms of helping get everybody back to work? We hear, Biden talked about this big dark winter thing that's coming. I suppose that's kind of I think that's supposed to be the combination of flu and COVID, isn't it? But what would you suggest that we do to help communities get rolling? We talked to your fellow representative yesterday, Bruce Chandler, and his take is, rather than all kind of new taxes on people who don't have money, is that we need to restore communities and businesses so that they can do what they do that provided the booming economy that we had in our state. What's your take on getting people back to work and all of that?
Yeah, well, I'll say two things about that. The first is that we have to trust the people, and we have to get resources and accurate information to the people so that they can make the best decisions for their communities and for their families and their churches and their businesses. So what that looks like to me is we have to come up with a strategy, and we have to fund the priorities. We have to fund retrofits of restaurants if that's what we're going to require. We have to fund rental assistance if that's what we're going to do in terms of making sure that anyone who's been affected by the coronavirus is able to stay in their home. We have to fund mortgage assistance, those things, but it has to be very narrow, and it has to be directly targeted at the people who have been impacted by this. I think one of the big issues that I have with the governor's proclamations is that it's just a broad stroke, and what he's doing is just implementing policies that he's always wanted to implement under the guise of coronavirus relief or solutions. And I think that's unacceptable, and I think that's disingenuous.
Well, we'll get to that budget question. I just got to insert this, if I may,
Sure.
Jeremy, and that is we are seeing that on the big stage as Democrats call COVID relief, and then it's money for the arts and it's money to prop up failing state governments.
Right. Exactly.
They've got a shopping list that they want, and here's not letting that crisis go to waste, as they say, in terms of trying to backfill all of those things. And that's very frustrating, and it's transparent to people who truly are paying attention. So hopefully there's a price to be paid for that. So we are aware, and we appreciate you pointing it out. Now on to the budget, sir.
Sure. So on to the budget. We don't have a revenue problem in the state. We have a spending problem in the state. There's plenty of money. The other side, and I have many friends on the other side of the aisle, but the other side and their leadership, the Seattle liberals who control both caucuses in the House and the Senate Democrats, they do a great job of creating new high watermarks of spending and then making that the new normal. 15 years ago, the budget was half what it is today. And so we were at $52 billion, billion with a B, and all of a sudden we have $4 billion less. Well, in 2008, our budget was $26 billion. So there is plenty of money in the system to fund our priorities if that's what we choose to do. But that's not what we choose to do. We don't fund education first. We don't fund mental health services first. As a matter of fact, our education system is fraying. Our mental health system is under public condemnation from the federal government. We don't fund homelessness prevention. We don't fund infrastructure improvements, roads and water storage. What the Democrats do is they pass out money in priorities that most people in the state don't agree with. Record compensation for state employees during a time when the private sector is suffering and having their businesses destroyed and their jobs taken away from them. We have a state's version of a Green New Deal that funds all kinds of crazy things, like a study to breach the Snake River Dam. How is that for an oxymoron, right? Hydroelectricity is the cleanest electricity, is one of the cleanest energies in the world. It is. There's no carbon emissions from it. And yet we are funding a study to breach a federal dam, which we don't even have the authority to do because it resonates with a small set of the Seattle liberal environmentalist extremist base. We funded free college, $3 billion for free college. No requirement that you get a high-demand degree, no requirement that you even graduate from college. Just created a new entitlement. Created a new entitlement for long-term care insurance. You don't even have to live in the state and fund and pay for the program. You can move into the state and start collecting long-term care insurance. And we do all those things, and then the Seattle Democrats say, we don't have any money. So now we have to create new taxes. Now we have to raise your car tabs to fund roads. Now we have to raise your property taxes because there's no money for schools. And it's crazy if you just take a longer look at it, which politicians and the liberal media, that side of the media doesn't like to do because they want government to grow. They want more power, they want more money, and they want more handouts for the people who fund their campaigns, and it's wrong. And I'm so proud of my fellow legislators in Yakima County and in Eastern Washington and the entire Republican caucuses for, even in a state like Washington that's very, very challenging sometimes in the political landscape, standing up and saying that message loudly and clearly year after year after year. And I believe it's having an effect, and I think we're going to make gains in the Republican caucus this year, and I think there's a very good chance that we could have a majority of Republicans in the Senate, the House, or both in 2022.
That's the key.
Man, oh man, that's some power of positive thinking. We hope that happens. Jeremie, can you stick around for some more time with us? We have to take a break for news and to pay a bill or two ourselves, but we'd like to continue this to the top of the hour if you're available.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, stay on the line with this 15th District State Representative Jeremie Dufault, one of the good guys out there. Conversation, information, including the latest on the candidates running to serve us here in the Yakima Valley.
Dave on the phone with us. We continue our conversation with 15th District State Representative Jeremie Dufault of Sela. Good morning, Jeremie.
Good morning.
Sorry for hanging up on you there, Jeremie. Yes, my bad. I didn't go to Davis, so I don't know how to work a phone. Okay? Come on.
That's right.
Cut me some slack. We were talking about state priorities and all of that, and you make such an eloquent case. I don't know why the folks from Seattle just don't let you speak and then follow your every word, quite frankly. I mean, I really thought that the way you laid out what truly should be priorities as opposed to what we are spending our money on. Are these people that just, you work with them, you know them, are they just that sort of idealistic in those directions that they can miss seeing all the obvious stuff that you point out? What's that like?
Well, I try never to get behind somebody's motives, but their actions are certainly inconsistent with what I think is common sense operation of government. I think you've got some folks who have they've never worked or existed outside of a state or a local bureaucracy, so they just don't understand how the private sector works, and that's just that's their worldview. You have a lot of folks over there who I think are hard-nosed politicians who will do whatever it takes to win, and there's nothing wrong with that, except if you're taking the state in the wrong direction. And so they are focused on and listening first and foremost to people who have incentives to do things that are contrary to the wishes and the best interests of the people of the state of Washington. So you've got some very, very well-funded public sector unions who basically are in a position to funnel tens of millions of dollars to their bosses, right? So, I mean, they work for the governor, they work for the legislature, and yet they are allowed under Washington state law, not in every state, but in Washington state, you can do this, that they can send millions and millions of dollars to continue to elect the people who give them pay raises and pump up their pensions and give them health insurance plans and programs, and all that stuff is good. I mean, we've got to take care of our civil servants, but the disparity between what a civil servant now makes in Washington state versus the private sector, it's getting far out of whack. And you see what happens in states that have done that for decades, like Illinois and New York and California, and they're going bankrupt. And people are leaving the state, and I don't want to see that happen in Washington. So I really think that the reason that they're so focused on taxes and why they play these shell games about, oh, we don't have any money, or we have to come up with these new direct funding sources to trick the people into raising their own taxes, is that, you know, they are just beholden, and their continued existence in the legislature depends upon these people continuing to funnel money into their campaigns year after year after year. A lot of the folks on the Republican side of the aisle, and some of the Democrats, they don't have that incentive. They go to the legislature as the Constitution, the state Constitution, intended it, as part-time public servants who left whatever their business was, whatever their profession was, to come over and serve their state for 4 years, 8 years, some short period of time, and to do the best they can for their people, their constituents, for 2 to 4 months. We have a part-time legislature in Washington state, and then go back home. And what a lot of these folks have done is they have become full-time politicians, lifelong politicians. Yeah, they're there for 20, 30 years. When the legislative session ends, they just stay there. They just stay in Olympia, and they keep doing things, working on legislation. And these organizations, they set up groups in Seattle. They set up these special interest PACs, and they give these legislators jobs. So it's not only the campaign resources, but they enable them, they empower them to continue over there. Meanwhile, the Republicans come back, and we go back and we run our businesses and our farms and our organizations, and then we go back in. And so I think that mindset is very dangerous, and I think that's why it's just become acceptable in Seattle that you have this full-time activist community and people doing things like the governor's doing, where just assume that government has a role 365 days out of the year in Washington state, and that's really not the way that our Constitution was set up.
So frustrating, you know, especially for Eastern and Central Washington, where we just feel like, you know, like they run this state over there. How do you overcome that, especially if Inslee wins again?
I think the best thing that we can do is to stay on message and to point out the hypocrisy. Yeah. And I think that's what the Republican caucus has been so good at doing. You look at this sex ed bill, contrary to the will of Washington state by huge margins. And yet this is what happens. You have the legislature saying the bill is called, the title of the bill is called Concerning Comprehensive Sexual Education Mandatory K through 12. And yet, what are their talking points right now? Their talking points are, well, this isn't really sex ed. It's really social emotional learning.
You can opt out.
Well, it's not really about sex ed. It's really about just information. And look, I went to Yakima Public Schools. We had sex education. This is a solution in search of a problem, and it's driven by this activist agenda coming out of Olympia, and we have to keep calling them out on that. No. The bill title is this. This is the subject matter. Same thing with defunding the police. Well, these protests really aren't violent, even though you can walk down the streets of Olympia and you see the businesses in downtown with their windows bashed in. So if we just keep saying, this is the truth, these are the facts, and the people of Washington state do not support that, if we can just stay on message, and yes, we've got to raise money, and yes, we've got to recruit good candidates, and those are all the things that we're working on. And that's why I'm so optimistic that even with the huge voting majorities that they have in King County, what does Scoop Jackson say? Senator Jackson, I see every vote I need from the top of the Space Needle. You can see the home of every Washington State Supreme Court justice from the top of the Space Needle. Don't get me wrong, we have an uphill battle, but it's a battle that I think we can win because we've got smart people and we've got good people, and the taxpayers of Washington State and the citizens of Washington State are on our side. One other example I'll give, it's about not saying, when you don't stand up during the national anthem and you normalize that, as a military officer, there is no way that you can explain that as not disrespecting the flag. Maybe the issue that you're advocating for is legitimate, but the manner in which you're doing it is fundamentally disrespectful to our flag and to our institutions, and we've got to push back on people trying to undermine our institutions, undermining our great history. We've got to be passing bills that mandate teaching American history, more American civics in our classrooms, not inundating it with Seattle liberal propaganda when it comes to sex and gender identity and all the other things that are embedded in this bill, the sex ed bill.
Wow. This is where I would
want to hang up,
break in, drop the mic, and stride away. Wow, that's good stuff, Jeremie, and that's why you're there. I think that kind of explanation, train of thought, belief in country, clear thinking, what passes for common sense for most of us over here. That's why it plays so well, and so we are delighted to be able to give you an opportunity to come on the air and to talk about that and present that. You are in a race. Last time out, did you run against A.J. Cooper? Was she?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So this isn't the first time for you two. Have you had any chance to be in similar events, side-by-side debates or anything like that?
We were together at the Yakima Herald Republic editorial board interview, and let me just say this about AJ. I think she's terrific, and this is the way that I look at politics. You can like the person and disagree with the policies, and we need more of that in the state. AJ, I'm so proud of her for the work that she did in Zilla. Helping out the developmentally disabled with that Zilla Cat Cafe. Sure. She was instrumental in setting that up. And, there's so many issues. 90% of the issues we all agree on. And if we could just focus on solving those problems, but what happens is all the oxygen gets taken out of the room. And unfortunately, I disagree with her on almost every policy. She supports a capital gains income tax. I'm strongly opposed to new taxes. She believes that we need a Green New Deal for Washington State. I think that's the wrong direction for our communities, especially our poor communities that need gasoline, inexpensive gasoline, to get to their jobs.
Right. Well, we liked her last year when we had a chance to interview her, personality-wise and all of that. She was a very nice person, and we're going to be talking to her hopefully next.
Good.
But you've made a pretty good case already, but we do want to give you one last focused, organized moment to make your pitch to the voters of our county and say, why send Jeremie Dufault back for season number 2?
Well, thank you, and let me just emphasize that. Thank you to you, Dave and Lance. Talk about civic education and engagement in the community. You guys have been an example of that for decades now. Just earlier in the program talking about the Humane Society and just helping out all these great organizations. So thank you to you guys for giving me this time, and thank you to your listeners. Every time I go on KIT, I get a phone call, several phone calls, emails from people saying, hey, wow, that was great. Thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for standing up. Where can I send some money to your campaign? What's your website, which is electjeremie.com, by the way, Jeremie spelled Jeremie, if you want to learn a little bit more about me, my connection to Yakima Valley. My family has been here for generations, law enforcement, farmers. I believe in this community. I love this community. I want to see it thrive and not go the other direction. I think that I have the values and the character and the conservative beliefs and political philosophy that match this district, that fit this district, and I think I have the work ethic and the ability to explain things in a way that can persuade folks over on the west side that they need to not be doing some of the crazy things that they want to prioritize and focus on. So thank you to your listeners. Thank you for the support you've given me my first 2 years. And if I'm privileged enough to be reelected, I will do the same thing. I will continue to fight for our community and for our values over in Olympia for 2 more years.